I thought I was the one keeping her safe. But somewhere along the way, she became the reason I healed. I had just moved into the quiet side of town, a neighborhood where time seemed to breathe slower, and people still waved from their porches. After a year filled with late-night emergency calls, and the kind of losses that leave invisible bruises, I thought a change of scenery might help. I was 25, a paramedic who had seen too much too soon, and I was tired of pretending I was fine. It was during one of those heavy summer storms that I met her. The rain had started suddenly, a curtain of silver washing over the street as I pulled my car into the driveway. That's when I noticed her, a woman struggling to carry 2 paper bags up the steps of the house across from mine. She was older, maybe early 40s, her hair tied loosely, a few strands plastered against her face from the rain. Without thinking, I jogged over, water soaking through my shirt in seconds. "Let me help you," I said, taking one of the bags before she could protest. She hesitated for half a second, proud, independent, but then smiled. "Thank you. I usually plan better than this," she said with a soft laugh, her voice calm but edged with fatigue. Her name was Elena. I didn't know it then, but that single encounter would shift something deep inside me. Inside her house, I caught the faint scent of paint and cedar. Canvases leaned against the walls, half-finished pieces filled with color and melancholy. She mentioned she was an art teacher, taking a break from work. Her tone was casual, but there was a silence between sentences, a pause that felt heavier than words. When she thanked me again, her eyes met mine, a shade of gray that seemed to carry both calm and sorrow. I wanted to say something comforting, but all that came out was a quiet, "Anytime." As I left her porch, the storm still drumming above us, I glanced back. She stood there for a moment, watching the rain, her hand resting on the doorframe as if lost in thought. There was something about her, a quiet resilience wrapped around something fragile, the kind of strength that comes from surviving, not from fighting. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in a romantic way, not yet. It was more like she reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That people could be soft without being weak, broken without being hopeless. I told myself it was nothing, just a neighbor, just a kind woman who'd needed a hand in the rain. But when I saw her again the next morning, standing on her porch with a mug of coffee, her hair catching the early light, I realized something had already begun to shift. She didn't look untouchable anymore. She looked human. And for the first time in months, so did I. Elena always carried herself like someone who had already made peace with life, the kind of person who didn't rush through mornings or fill silences just to avoid them. She moved with quiet purpose, painting on her porch when the weather was good, watering her plants with the kind of patience I'd never seen in anyone under 40. But the more I saw her, the more I realized that calm wasn't the absence of pain. It was something she'd built to contain it. It started with little things. A faint, pale mark where a wedding ring used to rest. The way her eyes lingered on the empty side of the table during breakfast when I stopped by with coffee. Sometimes, she'd be halfway through telling a story before her voice trailed off, as if memory had caught her mid-sentence and refused to let go. I never asked, but I noticed. One afternoon, I saw her struggling with a large wooden frame outside her studio. I crossed the street, offering help again. She smiled, the same polite, practiced smile she always wore when deflecting gratitude. "I'm fine, really," she said. But the way her arms trembled told another story. Together, we set the frame against the wall of her studio. Inside, the room was a storm of color. Streaks of blue and ochre layered across canvases, each painting half alive, half abandoned. "I was supposed to finish this 1 month ago," she said softly, running her fingers over a faded portrait. "It was for my husband." Her tone was gentle, but there was a weight to the word was that made the room suddenly feel smaller. She didn't have to explain. Grief leaves its fingerprints everywhere. In the unfinished things, the quiet mornings, the spaces beside you that stay empty no matter how many chairs you fill. "I can help," I said quietly. "Not with painting, but with setting things up, if you ever need." For a second, she looked like she might refuse again. But then she nodded. That day, I helped her rearrange the studio, setting up shelves, sweeping, moving canvases she couldn't bear to touch. The work was simple, but something about being there felt sacred. Like we were organizing the past to make space for a future neither of us was ready to admit existed. Every so often, I'd catch her glancing at me. Not with flirtation, but with something more searching. As if she couldn't decide whether to thank me or apologize for letting me see her cracks. When we finished, she smiled faintly and said, "You make things feel lighter. You know that?" I wanted to tell her that she made the world feel slower, calmer, that just being near her steadied something inside me. But instead, I just smiled back. As I left her studio, the evening light filtered through the window, casting soft gold on her face. She looked peaceful for a moment, then distant again. That's when I realized, protecting her wasn't about keeping her from breaking. It was about being there quietly while she put herself back together. Some nights stay with you forever. Not because of what happens, but because of who's there when everything falls apart. That night, the city was unusually still. The kind of silence that only comes after chaos. I just returned from a car accident involving a teenage boy who didn't make it. We did everything we could. But when you hold someone's pulse in your hands and feel it fade, the sound of the monitor flatlining doesn't stop ringing in your ears. By the time I got home, I didn't even turn the lights on. I sat on the porch, still in my uniform, the smell of antiseptic and smoke clinging to me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wasn't crying, I was too numb for that. But inside, something was coming apart quietly, the way a thread unravels without anyone noticing. Across the street, Elena's lights were still on. I remember thinking she might be painting late again, lost in color and memory. I didn't expect her to notice me sitting there in the dark. But she did. I heard her door open softly, then footsteps on the wet pavement. When I looked up, she was standing there, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, her expression calm but knowing. "You shouldn't sit out here like this," she said gently. "You'll catch a cold." I wanted to tell her I was fine, that I'd been through worse, that I didn't need anyone. But the words caught in my throat. Maybe she saw it, or maybe she just felt it because she didn't ask what happened. She didn't try to fix it. She just draped a blanket over my shoulders and sat down beside me. We didn't talk for a long time. The only sounds were the faint hum of crickets and the soft rhythm of rain against the railing. Her presence was quiet, steady, the kind that didn't demand anything. It was like she understood that sometimes silence can heal more than words ever could. After a while, she said softly, "You see a lot of pain in your job, don't you?" I nodded, eyes fixed on the streetlight flickering at the corner. "Some nights, it's hard to leave it behind." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. There was no pity in her eyes, just recognition, the kind that says I know that weight. I carried it too. Without thinking, I said, "I thought I was supposed to be the one helping you." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Maybe we're helping each other," she whispered. The air between us felt charged, not romantic, but deeply human. The kind of connection that happens when two people who've both seen darkness realize they don't have to face it alone. When she finally stood to leave, she rested her hand on my shoulder, just for a second. It was warm, grounding. That touch said more than any words could. "You're not alone anymore." And that night, for the first time in months, I believed it. After that night, something shifted between us. Quietly, naturally, like the first hint of spring after a long winter. There was no confession, no grand conversation about what happened on the porch. But from then on, Elena started appearing in the small spaces of my life, the places that used to feel empty. Some mornings, she'd wave from across the street, coffee in hand, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, sunlight soft against her face. Other days, she'd show up with a plate of something warm she'd accidentally made too much of. Soup, scones, sometimes even a pie that looked too perfect to be spontaneous. And then, one weekend, she invited me over to help her prepare for her upcoming art exhibition. "I could use another pair of hands," she said, though I suspected what she really meant was, I could use the company. Inside her studio, the smell of paint, coffee, and faint vanilla candles filled the air. Light poured through the windows in long golden stripes, illuminating the dust floating between us. We worked side by side, arranging canvases, polishing frames, laughing over her old art school stories. She had this gentle humor, the kind that made you forget how heavy your heart was. I noticed how she laughed differently now. It wasn't forced or polite. It was soft, unguarded. And when she laughed, she'd touch my arm lightly, as if grounding herself. At one point, while hanging a large canvas, she stumbled slightly and reached out, her hand brushing my chest. We both froze for a second, startled by how natural the touch felt. Her cheeks flushed, and she quickly looked away, pretending to adjust the painting. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. It wasn't romance yet. It was something quieter, something that lived in the pauses. Later, we took a break on her porch. The sun was low, painting everything in a soft amber hue. I handed her a cup of tea, and she smiled. "You know," she said, "I haven't felt this normal in a long time." "Normal's underrated," I replied, and she laughed, the sound mingling with the wind chimes by her door. For the first time, I realized how easy it was to breathe around her. No pretending, no pressure, just being. When she talked about her husband that evening, there was no sharpness in her tone, just acceptance. I could see it in her eyes. Grief had turned into gratitude. She wasn't trying to move on. She was simply learning how to live again. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of those days, the laughter, the painting, the shared meals, I realized that healing wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was just two people sitting close enough for their silences to feel understood. She never said thank you for being there, and I never told her how much she'd already done for me. We didn't need to. Some things you just feel wordlessly deeply, like sunlight on skin after the rain. The evening of Elena's exhibition felt like a turning point. For her, and for us. I could tell she was nervous. She'd spent weeks perfecting every detail, and the house had become a storm of brushes, canvases, and half-finished mugs of coffee. But when she stepped out that night, dressed in a simple navy dress with her hair falling loosely over her shoulders, there was no trace of hesitation. She looked radiant, like a woman finally reclaiming her light. "You'll come, right?" she asked that morning, half teasing but not quite hiding the question behind her eyes. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and meant it. The gallery was warm and crowded, filled with polite laughter, music, and the low hum of conversation. Her paintings hung across the room, bursts of color that spoke more about loss and resilience than words ever could. I watched her from a distance as she moved through the crowd, graceful and composed, every bit the woman people admired. And then I saw him, a tall man, older, confident, greeting her with a familiarity that made something twist inside me. He placed a hand on her arm as they laughed, and she leaned in, smiling in that soft, genuine way I hadn't seen her give anyone else. For a moment, the room felt smaller, louder. I told myself it was none of my business. She didn't know me anything. We weren't together, but my chest ached anyway. When she spotted me across the room, she smiled, a warm, easy smile, and waved me over. But I couldn't move. Something in me had already stepped back. I nodded politely, pretending to admire a painting, before slipping out into the night air. The cool wind hit my face as I leaned against the brick wall outside, trying to make sense of the jealousy I had no right to feel. I'd spent so long convincing myself I was only there to help her, that what I felt was compassion, not longing. But watching her with someone else made me realize how deeply I'd let her in. When she found me later, I could tell she sensed the distance. "You left early," she said softly, standing a few steps away. "Yeah," I replied, avoiding her gaze. "Didn't want to get in the way." Her brow furrowed slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. "In the way of what?" I shrugged, forcing a small smile. "You seemed happy. That's all that matters." She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to read what I wasn't saying. Then she simply nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm glad you came." As she turned to go, I noticed the faint sadness in her expression, something fragile beneath her calm. but I was too tangled in my own insecurity to see it for what it was. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. Her laughter, that man's hand on her arm, the look in her eyes when I pulled away. I told myself I was protecting her, giving her space, letting her be free. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't protecting her. I was protecting myself from how much I already cared. I hadn't seen Elena for days after the exhibition. Her house, usually alive with the soft hum of music or the faint scent of paint, felt silent when I passed by. I told myself she was busy, that maybe the man from the gallery had stayed in her life. But every time I saw her porch light flicker on at night, something inside me ached. I tried to keep busy. Work, gym, long drives nowhere. But silence has a way of catching up to you when there's something unsaid sitting heavy in your chest. Then, one evening, just as the sky turned gold and the air began to cool, there was a soft knock at my door. When I opened it, she was standing there, her hair slightly windblown, her eyes uncertain but determined. She looked tired, like she'd been thinking about this moment as much as I had. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and stepped aside. Inside, she paced slowly, arms folded, searching for the right words. "You've been distant," she said finally. "Ever since that night. Did I do something?" Her voice wasn't defensive, just wounded in a quiet way that made my chest tighten. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. "It's not you. It's me trying not to make something out of nothing." She frowned. "Something?" I hesitated. "That man at the gallery, you two looked close. I didn't want to assume anything, or—" I trailed off, embarrassed by the rawness of it. For a second, she just stared at me. And then, to my surprise, she laughed. Not mockingly, just softly, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "That was Daniel," she said between small laughs. "He's my brother-in-law, my late husband's brother. He helped me organize the exhibit." The air left my lungs. "Oh," I said, feeling both foolish and relieved all at once. Her expression softened. "You thought," she began, shaking her head. "You really thought I'd moved on that easily?" "I didn't think I had the right to ask," I admitted quietly. For a moment, silence filled the room again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was fragile, honest. She took a step closer, her voice gentler now. "You've been there for me in ways you don't even realize. You helped me see color again when I thought everything was gray." Her eyes shimmered, and I could feel the sincerity in her words. "You were the one who reminded me I could still feel," she continued. "And maybe that's what scared me." Before I could respond, she reached out, her fingers, but somewhere along the line, you became part of it. I took her hand fully then, my thumb tracing the edge of her palm. "I wanted to protect you," I said softly, "but you're the one who saved me." For the first time, neither of us looked away. There was no grand confession, no rush of passion, just a quiet understanding, a shared truth that had been growing between us all along. And in that still moment, with her hand in mine and the evening light spilling through the window, I knew. Whatever came next didn't have to be certain to be real. That it's strange how peace doesn't arrive with a grand moment. It just settles in quietly one day, like morning light seeping through half-closed curtains. That's what life with Elena began to feel like. Calm, steady, unhurried. Months passed since that night we finally spoke the truth. Nothing dramatic changed. No whirlwind romance. No declarations of love shouted into the rain. Instead, it was small things that told the story of what we were becoming. We'd meet most mornings for coffee on her porch. She'd sit cross-legged with a sketchbook in her lap, and I'd read, pretending not to notice when she kept glancing at me before sketching something new. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of her drawing, rough outlines of hands, faces, or scenes that felt strangely familiar. She never admitted it, but I think I became part of her art, the way she became part of my quiet. On weekends, we'd take slow walks through the park. She'd bring her pencils. I'd bring my camera. She'd pause to capture the way sunlight filtered through leaves, and I'd capture her, not posed, just being. The way she smiled when the wind brushed her hair, or how she tilted her head when she was lost in thought. There were still days when shadows returned, when she'd stare at an old photograph a little too long, or when I'd come home from a bad shift carrying that familiar heaviness in my chest. But those moments didn't scare us anymore. We didn't rush to fix them. We'd just sit together, sometimes saying nothing, sometimes saying everything with a single touch. One evening, as we walked back from the park, the sun dipped low, casting the sky in soft gold. She stopped near a bench, watching children chase each other through the grass. "You know," she said quietly, "for a long time I thought my story ended when he died, that everything after was just waiting." I looked at her, the fading light brushing her face with warmth. "And now?" I asked. She turned toward me, smiling softly. "Now it feels like I'm finally living the chapters one didn't know were still left." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she slipped her hand into mine. Not hesitant, not uncertain, just sure. The world felt still around us. No noise, no hurry, just the rhythm of our breathing and the faint rustle of leaves. In that silence, I thought about how everything had changed without either of us meaning it to. I'd come into her life wanting to protect her from her grief. She'd walked into mine and quietly taught me how to heal from my own. When I narrate it now, when I think of how two broken people found something whole, I don't call it fate or destiny. I just call it kindness, the kind that lingers long enough to become love. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, she leaned against my shoulder, and for the first time, I didn't think about tomorrow as something uncertain. Tomorrow, I realized, was already here, in her laughter, in her warmth, in the gentle way she made me feel at home in my own heart again.